So I thought we could just like maybe get to know each other a little bit. So when did you decide to become a communist, and what happened? What happened in your life to make you a commie?
It's funny. So my grandparents on my mom's side are immigrants from Ireland, and on my dad's side, immigrants from the Soviet Union. Right. So I grew up in a house that was roughly pro-Soviet. They weren't really political people. They just, everybody's always like, why did they move away from communism and all this? And I'm like, normal reasons people move, right? Family, work, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. But when I was young, I grew up with these stories from my grandma, who was obsessive about Stalin, right? For her, Stalin was the most heroic figure in all of history. The guy that beat Hitler, basically, right? Mm-hmm. So at the end of the Cold War, when I was growing up, I'm a little older than I look. I'm in my 40s. I was getting told one story about history and global history at home, and then another story, in the media and at school and all that kind of stuff. And it made me develop sort of a very deep skepticism about mainstream news agencies, what the government tells us, etc. And so I began asking my dad about it, who tried to teach me about Marxism when I was younger. It did not take. And I decided to tell, my teenage rebellion was sort of becoming an anarchist and telling him I was going to go move to California and, smash the state by playing music or some childish fantasy. But then the sort of onset of this, what we call this highest stage of imperialism, comes on. The middle class is deteriorating at a more rapid pace, and I notice it's sort of radicalizing people, but in this like very mishmashy, directionless way. Mm-hmm. Right. And that sort of inspired me to readdress the entire issue. I met up with Carlos and Eddie, who had founded the Midwestern Marx Institute. And it's kind of history from there, I guess.
All right. And you consider yourself to be a Bolshevik?
Sure. You can say Bolshevik. We generally say American communist. Okay. Because there's a lot of there's a lot of like weird ways we're taught to think about political labels, right? That like everyone fits into this neat little thing. The Marxist view of sort of how communism forms in a given country, right, is from dialectical logic, or like what we consider a developmental form of logic. And rather than informal logic, where you could sort of, oh, my cat's saying hello, where you could sort of see what is universal as just that is not, which is not particular. We see what is universal instead as that which arises in many particular forms. And so when we say American communism, it's that American communists rise in this moment because of some sort of necessity. Okay, I'll let you out. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. They want what they want.
Right. All right. And has to be grounded in our own people, our own traditions, our own cultures, and ways of, addressing problems and struggles and all that kind of stuff. So while we take inspiration from the Bolsheviks and consider Marxism, Leninism a sort of more universal a sort of foundation of our worldview, we also include W.E.B. Du Bois as like another, what you'd call the heads of Marxism, as what we call the father of American Marxism, which we sort of castigate all of the so-called Marxists of the last period of history as being dogmatic and incorrect. And that would be one of the reasons they didn't gain any popularity, not really having a homegrown approach. And then before that, in the olden times, really just kind of taking the Soviet approach, right? Like being an American Bolshevik was just copying the Soviets and listening to whatever the Soviets said. And I mean, it should be common sense that, the American people are never going to accept some foreign ideology guiding them, just as the Russian people wouldn't have, or the Chinese people wouldn't have, but it wasn't, and here we are.
Okay. Okay. So like what I mean, I know one of the biggest questions my audience has is like, what's the difference between you guys and like the abolish the family, abolish gender, the queer Marxists? Because we watch a lot of queer Marxists. We're starting to dig into queer anarchist literature, and it's some of the scariest stuff you've ever seen in your life. Like how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so we distinguish ourselves. We call them sort of the last period's fake left or left. We sort of, the way Marxism views what is left and what is right is sort of different. We view it from, rather than what people say they are doing, to instead what we feel their material place in society is. So you're left if you're sort of pushing society forward, and you're right if you're sort of pushing against that, right? So a lot of people who call themselves the right in material reality are actually more on the left. They just, you know, words are funny like that. But we view them as sort of products of a long period of the distortion of Marxism that is shot through with, you know, U.S. intelligence agencies and establishment NGOs and foundations. A lot of it comes out of the sort of founding thinking of it, which is the Frankfurt School, which I'm sure you've heard of, right?
Yeah, actually, this is funny because the minute that I asked you this question, Rottweiler sent in this super chat saying, Noah, what's your take on queer Marxism and its roots in postmodernism and identity politics? And what are you doing so they don't co-opt you? So maybe that kind of goes in the direction you were just going.
Yeah, obviously we consider them rabid anti-communists, and there's a thinker that we talked to, his name's Gabriel Rockhill, who's doing a lot of research on this. It's new research with Freedom of Information Act stuff that's sort of tracking the entire history of where this comes from, how, you know, Herbert Marcuse was wrapped up with the CIA and the Rockefeller Foundation and that kind of stuff.
No kidding. Are you serious?
Yeah. We interviewed him on our channel back years ago, I think, maybe 2 years ago, back before I had a decent camera. So like my camera's on top of my monitor, so I'm like down here looking like a little troll guy, right? But it's a good interview, and he's a brilliant guy. And he explains like a whole lot of this is all sort of within the machinations of the establishment to create a left that's acceptable for its aims. And these two over time sort of intermingle. And so we call these forces right now the vanguard of finance capital, the ruling class. I mean, they're in complete agreement with them.
And well, and Rottweiler says, and Rottweiler just knows a lot of stuff, so he's one of my default go-tos. Marcuse had somewhat loose ties with intelligence agencies. Isn't that interesting? Does James Lindsay talk about that? Does anyone know in the chat? Like, because that's the first time I've ever heard that, but it actually makes total and complete sense. So you actually think that those people are anti-communist, you said?
100%. Yeah, and if you read their theory, and I mean, within my institute, I'm not as smart as Carlos, who's sort of our major theorist. Like, he's probably the smartest guy I've ever met. But I do know a bit about it, and I have read a few of these people, and their theory sort of rejects the foundational, what we would say are observational premises of Marxism, right? That it's the way society goes about being society in a given era that affect its culture, the way it thinks and moves and speaks and eats and all that kind of stuff. They reject that completely and believe change can come from some sort of cultural sort of vanguard, right? That's why they started calling themselves cultural Marxists, and that term really got picked up. The problem is they're not Marxists, and they were rabidly anti-communist against every existing communist country there was. They were talking about, you know, how progressive the U.S. was invading Vietnam and all that kind of stuff. So,
Okay, I already have so many questions about this. So let me ask you about a couple different groups that we've interacted with on this channel. So a couple weeks ago, I had two leaders from the Revolutionary Communists of America on the channel to talk about what they're doing. Like, what do you think? Because you're a part of the Communist Party USA, right? And that it doesn't they don't seem to be particularly happy with the Communist Party USA, nor are they happy with the Democratic Socialists of America. What do you think about the Revolutionary Communists of America?
It's a very good question. I'm usually suspicious of these groups that were nowhere and then are seemingly everywhere overnight. Now, I want to make one thing clear, that my membership with the Communist Party may be up in the air right now.
Okay.
They
don't really do anything.
Right. No, and they haven't for a very long time.
Yeah.
Right. They used to be important. I mean, back in the day, they were, who built the CIO, but nowadays they're almost a non-entity. People don't even know they're still around, right? But they're not very happy. They sort of allowed a hit piece on my institute and some of our friends to be published on their website, probably without the leadership I've been knowing. And so I wrote an article that was not very kind to them. And add to that, I haven't paid my dues in months because of the, constant liberalism and that kind of stuff. So maybe I'm a member, maybe not. I still get all of the stuff, but I'm not active organizing with them and haven't been for a while. So I want to make that clear.
So it's like the Libertarian Party. You guys fight with each other and it's just all filled with nonsense. And is it a completely fruitless effort to involve yourself in? I totally understand this.
Right. The Libertarian Party, there's some amazing people in that party, by the way, and then some like jokers that have no idea what libertarianism is. And yeah, well, that's the Communist Party as well. So it's wild to me, because I think like everyone who sees that something's wrong with our society and genuinely wants to try to fix it, if you just get together and just sort of drop all the labels and dogmas and everything you think and just try to address the problems, it's a lot simpler than we try to make it be. We sort of make it too hard on ourselves. But regarding the Revolutionary Communists of America, they're a new iteration of an old Trotskyist party, who were like the first arch anti-communists, saying nothing's real communism but what we say are communism, right? And all the existing communism in the world is fake, and it's what I think that's the real communism, So they're just another one of those. I'm wary of when people sort of are nowhere and then everywhere, and that's how it seems to be with them. But maybe they just got a good social media game. I don't know.
I mean, they've been heavily recruiting for a long time on college campuses and in unions and stuff. Like I have literally been seeing their stuff show up everywhere for years now. And so I wasn't actually surprised when they did this. But it does seem like they're taking it to the next level now. So
maybe that's me being behind the times. I'm not on college campuses very often. So
yeah. Well, I think it's probably a function of like anytime someone sees something communist, I eventually will hear about it somewhere. So they do these stickering campaigns where they have these Karl Marx stickers where it's like Karl Marx pointing at you and it says, "Are you a Marxist?" and it has a QR code, and they send out those stickers everywhere, and those stickers are all over the goddamn place. And so I always end up seeing pictures of them.
Yeah, I hate stuff like that so much.
All
that does is make communism look like we're a bunch of vandals, right? Like, just completely disregarding other people's property.
Well, you guys don't believe in private property, though, so you would disregard other people's property, wouldn't you?
You know what's funny about that? Marx is like, this is one of the things that's one of the big misconceptions about Marxism, right? Marx writes in the Communist Manifesto, though, he's like that, we get reproached with wanting to do away with private property, but he instead says that it's our current society that's already done away with private property for over 90% of the population. And it's even more these days. I forget what the exact number is on what people's net worth is in America, but it's a giant majority that's zero or less than zero. Meaning, like, even when we own our houses, really the banks own our houses,
Mm-hmm. I mean, fair enough, but like I have you know, Marxist, communist, and I kind of use the term Marxist, socialist, and communist interchangeably just because I've heard so many people use them interchangeably. So just like setting that baseline, I've heard them say, I have them on video saying that private property includes our ability to own a home. So under communism, we wouldn't own our homes either. Our ability to own land, our ability to own a business, like even like a small business, our ability to own intellectual property, our ability to own an apartment or an Airbnb and rent it out as a landlord. And the most disturbing ones for me are they define parental rights as a form of private property that they want to abolish. And I have them on tape saying they want to abolish all individual liberties because individual liberties are a form of private property. And so I know that not every socialist believes all of those things, but I think you can kind of understand for someone like me who, like, you know, I'm an anarcho-capitalist because I like having, like, I like my stuff and I like being in charge of me. And I don't want, no offense, Noah, you seem like a nice guy, I don't want you taking my stuff from me, okay? Like, I work hard for my stuff. It's mine, it's not yours. Like, I think you might be able to understand how this can be a little dystopian when you start hearing socialists say these things to rather large audiences sometimes on video.
Yeah, no kidding. And this is one of the reasons we are constantly attacked by the last period of history's, you know, left, right? Is because we actually go to the Marxist texts, read them, understand them in dialectical logic, the way they're actually written, rather than the sort of guesswork that a lot of them do, and come away with something differently, that you're absolutely entitled to what you own. That people say they want to come and take it is crazy. The whole point of Marxism is to understand how this property is developed and sort of what the problems are that led to, you know, Marx saying that 90% of people don't even get that, right? And that, like, sort of end the sort of parasitism and wanting of something for nothing that the ruling class sort of exists as, the financial elites. If you look at like any actual communist country, look at China right now, right? I mean, way higher rate of home ownership than we have here. People's homes are their stability, something they can fall back on if something goes wrong, not to mention, you know, the sentimental value within homes.
Yeah. So let me ask you about another group that we watch an awful lot. So Haymarket Books. Haymarket Books is the latest iteration of like what the International Socialist Organization after they had their big Me Too scandal. But they do a lot of stuff. They publish a metric ton of books. They hold a metric ton of events. I crashed their socialism conference last year, even though they preemptively banned me from the conference. But I went anyway under a fake name and I pretended to be non-binary. And so I was there for 3 days with all of them and I recorded them. And so like, I mean, they're pretty influential, I think, on the American left. What do you think of them?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty damning remark on the state of the American left. There may be quite a lot of them, but they're not serious. They aren't actually in it to improve the conditions of the real existing working class as it is. I mean, Trotskyists are sort of notorious for doing that, right? Making everything about some pure noble idea that they have, and they even treat the working class like this, right? So the working class is only organizable in the abstract, right? This sort of idea of working class or proletariat, if they want to, you know, be all jargony. But when it comes to the real working class, that as we exist, they're all hopelessly backwards and ignorant. Right. And, you know, they don't think 1,000 genders makes sense. So they're all canceled and forget them. I don't want to say that's specifically Trotskyists. That's the overarching left. And actually, Trots are usually okay on that. But I mean, it's all these problems sort of coalesce into one bleh.
Okay. All right. What is your read on the college protests and all of that stuff going on right now?
I think it's a really complicated issue, right? So I want to be not to like bring out the old meme, like let's be very clear about this, right? But 100% we are, and I am on the side of Palestine and their struggle. And I love to see students making their voices heard. And it's horrible what some of the sort of counter protest tactics have been. Mass arrests when people aren't really breaking the law, etc. The sort of change in the law to redefine anti-Semitism is really scary, and anyone who is a fan of personal liberty should be aware of that, right? Their redefinition of anti-Semitism, because it has implications going way past this too. However, at the same time, I think a lot of protest, what happens when they don't listen, right? The U.S. government, I think, changed one weapon they weren't going to sell, and that's it, right? What do you do next? And I think a lot of people right now, because the left has been such a mess, don't know. And so that's why we're trying to move forward as sort of this. I'm going to be speaking at an event. What day is it? Maybe, or it's on the 24th. So what's that? 9 days from now, in Dearborn, Michigan, called Free America to Free Palestine, right? It's about Palestine, but really, if we want our voices to even matter on that issue, especially, it's our own government that we need to address, because it's our own government that's the problem. And so I would just say that I would hope the students could align with even the Trump people who are there counter protesting them, because they both seem to have the same real material problem. I was watching a guy, actually the organizer of that event, Jackson Hinkle. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Yeah, I don't like him.
I figured you wouldn't, right? You're an anarchist.
He's a Marxist-Leninist.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And he's also a dick. Justin, I can agree with someone and they can still be a dick.
Right. Yeah. Every time I've spoken to him, he's been nothing but nice to me. So that I don't know about, right? But I have seen him be a dick to a lot of other people. So there's that. But no, I was watching him and Alex Jones talk about that, right? And it was wild watching them agree that, like, it's just like you want to just shake everybody and go, what are you doing? You guys have the same problem. But, they're more interested in getting pointed at each other than anybody actually responsible for destroying our country.
Well, I mean, let me open the door for, you opened the door for this question, so I'm going to ask it. Like, what do you think about Nick Fuentes then? Because Nick Fuentes, by and large, is like on your side on this,
Nick Fuentes is a Zionist, from what I hear.
No, he is. No, he's not. No,
I think he has some weird ideas that are like very reminiscent of sort of like belief in wizards and hobbits and all that, right? About magical blood quantums and nonsense like that.
I have been listening to Nick a lot since October 7th and somehow kind of became kind of friends with him. And so I've never heard him say anything like that. In fact, I would say that one of the things that, I think that the political climate since October 7th has actually been very interesting, because you kind of have, you had these strange bedfellows that came up, and it also kind of just exposed a lot of people who are just like grifters and shills for like AIPAC and like all that stuff. And it's like, so I feel like me and many people in my community, though not everyone, has been very kind of like perturbed at the fact that we tend to agree more with you guys on the whole Israel-Palestine thing, where I think they're trying to genocide the Palestinians. I think it's absolutely abhorrent. And, some people disagree with me on that, but I think that that's what's going on. And I started listening to Nick right after October 7th, mostly because I thought he was going to be saying some crazy stuff and I wanted to be entertained by that. But it turned out he actually had some really even-keeled takes, like possibly some of the most even-keeled takes. So I'm not hearing him say magical stuff like that. So I don't know, but like, I mean, like it begs the question, and Nick actually has talked about this on his show. If he showed up to try to talk to you guys, like, what would you think of him? Would you even talk to him? Like, what would happen?
That's a good question. I was kind of making fun of him a bit, right?
Yeah, I know. I mean, people do.
But I do genuinely think that at the core of the sort of race realism logic lies that philosophical foundation of a belief in magic, that your blood and ethnicity control your social reality, and how you act in some way. And I don't want to bore you with a whole discussion on that, but okay. If Nick Fuentes came up and said, "Hey Noah, let's talk about this," I would talk. I'll talk to anybody, because my thing is, the one thing I genuinely hate is people who just want to silence everyone, right? If our ideas are correct, right, why would we be afraid of telling them to people? Right? Why would we be afraid of an idea we consider incorrect? For me, that's just, again, it's the sort of cancel culture of the left, right? The last period of history's left, where they just want to get rid of everything they consider bad, because at the end of the day, they're not confident in their ideas. And I'm sure you, as you were saying earlier, do know more about their ideology than they do. I've been around them for quite a long time now, and most of them refuse to educate themselves. And they sort of want to treat the class struggle as a social scene rather than a site of real social change.
Okay. I mean, I think it's interesting that again, like, I think it's like the bedfellows since October 7th are interesting in terms of, like, you have a lot of like just like start an anti-war people who have always been anti-war, and then you have people who, you know, said they were anti-war for a while, but as soon as it came to sending Israel $30 billion and like all the stuff, then they were totally like fine with that. And so I mean, I do think it's kind of an interesting time in our political landscape. Now, one of the things I actually heard Eddie say, I think on one of your guys's streams that we watched one time, is he was talking about how you guys always get canceled off of social media too. And I think that was interesting for people to hear, because there's this assumption that only the right gets canceled off of social media. And obviously, like, Nick just got reinstated on Twitter because of a benevolent gesture from Elon Musk and all this stuff. So can you talk about some of the cancellations that you guys have experienced and how you see it?
Yeah, and you're right. It's wild how much more vicious the left is with Marxists than even the right. Because they see us as wanting, I'm sorry, I'm rambling and you asked a question. My bad.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we've gotten severe censorship, especially on our most popular platform, which is TikTok. Our original profile, when ByteDance, which is a company out of Singapore, owned it and controlled the content management, had, I think, just over 500,000 followers. So that means, you know, every other post was getting millions of views and really getting things out there. And when the US government forced content management to be handled by Oracle, which is a company in Texas, that account was immediately banned, along with a bunch of other anti-imperialists, whether they're from the right, left, whatever, that were speaking out against the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. We've had, I think, 6 other accounts banned since then on TikTok alone. Really, we've been demonetized and all that kind of stuff. Google, not a big fan of us. But I think it's interesting. Alan McLeod did a really good expose about who actually works at Oracle. And it is filled with State Department people and intelligence agency people. I mean, you can look up who's their board of directors and who their content management is, and just, you know, look up the names. It's crazy that nobody's thinking about that. But yeah, I think Elon Musk's Twitter is one place where he at least tries not to do that. I don't think he's doing a particularly good job with all the bots and all that, but he at least tries, and that's been huge for us. We get, you know, a few thousand live views on our live streams, and 90% of them come from Twitter anymore. So
yeah. All right. Fair enough. I want to start getting into some of these super chats, and I appreciate you guys sending them in. Actually, so can I ask you a trolley question that came in right before we went live? This isn't a super chat, but you know, I'll ask. Ask Noah why he's registered Democrat if he's such a real Marxist.
So this guy is really, really weird. This guy's been sort of internet stalking not just me, but a few of my friends and some other people, and he thinks he's sort of figured out all of our addresses and real names and all of this. And he's like, you know, I'm doxing them and spreading all this info. Look at me, right? He's a very, very sad guy. So I haven't voted in maybe since Obama, I guess. So if I'm registered Democrat, I don't know if I am or not. It would have been, you know, when I was young and stupid.
All right. Fair enough. I have those types of internet people too, so I completely understand that. We'll get into some real Rottweiler says 2 questions for the guest. What's the incentive for innovation in a socialist regime, and what would the regime do about inherited wealth and businesses? Both good questions, I think.
Great questions. And those are the sort of questions the founding fathers of America were discussing, right? Thomas Jefferson's main vexing question is, what do we do about inheritance? Because they were trying to get over sort of feudal privilege, right? I mean, we can look at communist countries existing now, right? China has plenty of incentive for people to start businesses and innovate. They're leading the world in information technology. But American communism, like our sort of socialist America, will have to figure out an American way to do that, right? They have this sort of mix of democracy and meritocracy that works for them. But in the US, we're a very sort of, we put a lot of focus on personal freedom and ingenuity, the sort of what Stalin used to call American grit and American pragmatism. And said that the Soviets really admired America for that. You know, that was before the Cold War, and the very big chance that the Cold War never would have happened and history would have turned out differently. But it's up to the people. I think there's a big misconception that socialism is this set of policies or that set of policies. We must do A, B, and C. And then we bake our socialism pie, right? At 500 degrees for whatever time. But socialism is really just a general category that means that our society has a social reason for existing, right? That it puts the needs of society in front. And however we do that is up to the sort of historical conditions giving rise to it.
But why do I have to put the needs of everyone else in front of me and what I want?
I would assume you wouldn't, right? No. I wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't in any way.
I mean, I put my family's needs before mine. I put my community's needs before mine. But that's my choice, right? I choose to help my community out. I don't think people need forced to do that. There's plenty of incentives to be a good person regardless. I like helping, right? I like the sort of sense of everybody working together to accomplish a goal and helping someone else do something that they can't do. Like when COVID hit, we organized a prescription delivery service for the elderly people in my neighborhood, right? I didn't need incentivized to do it. I just kind of did it. But I didn't at the same time expect all my neighbors to sign up, right? Because people have busy lives. They have things going on. I think that kind of stuff all just evens out, you know?
Are you sure you're not an anarcho-capitalist? I'm asking, like, honestly, because everything that you're saying sounds like voluntarism to me.
Well, I'm just thinking we're a country of hundreds of millions of people, right? The idea that we need to force people to not work in their own interests is silly to me. I don't see a world where that actually happens. I mean, in a different framing, we can say that we spend all day at work doing that already, right? where I have to sell my sort of labor to, you know, some guy in an office who's just kind of sitting there getting rich while I work all day for it. But like, I think it's just a misconception about Marxism that like everyone gets forced to work for someone else. The whole point is everyone in the working class in general has the same material interests. We all just want to live like a peaceful, stable life without people sort of getting in the way of that, right? And part of what we consider American Marxism is the American sort of pioneer spirit in which that happens, right? Taking it upon yourself to do that, right? Starting your own company, but that can't happen anymore, right? The way it can in, say, China.
I don't buy into that at all. And I actually had this exact same conversation with the revolutionary communists of America, where like I think it's actually easier than ever to start your own company. I mean, I started my own consulting practice in like 2012 as I was commuting on a bus every day to go from New Hampshire to Boston to work my consulting job. And then I built my own consulting practice online, like on my, 2 to 3 hour evening commutes, morning and evening commute or whatever. I started that business. I eventually was able to quit my job, go work for myself. That was pretty rad. Then COVID hit and all of my consulting business got wiped out. But luckily, this thing called YouTube exists, and I somehow became the conservative darling for a year and was trotted around the conservative political circuit because I left the Democratic Party publicly and all this stuff. And so all of a sudden I was doing this, but also like I built my platform. I built my community. I like, this is all a business. I built my merch store. And, the last communists I talked to made fun of me for like selling tea. They were like, they said, "Oh, do you have a hobby that you've ever turned into a job?" I was like, yeah, I make t-shirts and stuff and sell cool designs that make me laugh and make other people laugh. And that's a sustainable business. And they were like, oh, like normal people can't do that. I was like, what are you talking about? Normal people can't do that. Everything in that business was basically set up for free. It's all used free tools. It's all print on demand. And then I was able to add more premium stuff as it made more money, but like anyone can do that.
So that's a very good point. And I was also laughing at your merch store. Because
it's funny, isn't it?
It's brilliant marketing, by the way, because you can get people in on the joke and people not in on the joke. But anyway,
I've said repeatedly, like my very best designs are the ones where people don't know what side I'm on.
Yeah. So I won't get into. I was going to tell some stuff I shouldn't, but regarding that, everyone can do it. In theory, yes, right. In theory, I could even quit my job and dedicate myself to doing Midwestern Marx full time, right? Our institute, even despite being censored like crazy, has brought in a little bit of money. I teach a class. We charge for that. We're not against people enriching themselves like that, right?
Are you funded by George Soros?
Yes. No, although that is a rumor that Saturn, that Johnny Saturn guy started about us, which was good. Yeah. But no, I think if we look at, who actually gets into a place on the internet where they can actually provide for not just themselves, but maybe a family or just a comfortable life, it's a relatively small amount of people. That's just, numbers playing odds. It's the same as sort of, I've really, really, really wanted to break out on my own. I do finish carpentry for a living, right? But with the domination of the company I actually work for, I will be competing against what amounts to a monopoly, right? And that's a lot of the reason why people don't start businesses, is because we have these monopolies here. They already exist. And I mean, Rockefeller, for instance, was famous for buying up small businesses on a whim, right? We're at this point where we've passed that really competitive stage. I mean, it's over 80% of small businesses that fail in the first year. So yes, people can try it, but the vast majority, it's just not realistic. That doesn't mean that people that can shouldn't. I think they should. And I think what is important is to make sure that economic opportunity is genuinely there rather than just theoretically there for everyone. And I think the only way to do that is through a communist party and a socialist state that's dedicated to empowering society overall rather than this individual and that one. I know that's where we'd actually disagree.
Yeah, we do.
But
I quite frankly think most people are lazy, and I think that, like, I mean, I think like, and maybe that's a little dismissive, and I'll say like it's a little bit dismissive, but I think that our society has made a lot of people very lazy and reticent to get up and actually do what's required. Like, I mean, people think like,
not to mention entitled.
Yeah, I agree with I agree with that as well. And it's like, like the streaming thing and creating content every day is not easy. A lot of people think this is easy, but the only way you're able to be successful at this is if you treat it. I actually what's funny? Katie Herzog dragged me for this at one point. Katie Herzog is just like one of the most disingenuous journalists on the planet. Never go near that woman if you have to. But like, she actually did this whole podcast about me where she was like, and Karlyn is streaming all the time. I'm like, it's a job. Like, it's a job. You show up consistently and do your job. And just because most streamers don't show up consistently, like that's not a me problem. That's a them problem.
Right. That's like yelling at me for working overtime.
Yeah.
Like, that's where the money's at. Of course I'm going to work overtime. Right. It's so weird. I agree that a lot of people are lazy, but I try to not end there and look a little deeper and say why. And it's because really we get sort of thrust into this world where we spend most of our life working 8 hours a day to make somebody else rich. And so that affects you on a subconscious level, right? It's one of the reasons that, the cool kids in school are the ones that don't try and joke around and slack off and don't excel. Now, look at a communist country like China. The kids considered cool are the straight A students that are excelling. And we're falling behind that. And our sort of generations growing up are lazier. My generation, Generation X, is like the laziest, most self-important generation there ever has been. I think it's been getting slightly better after that, but because it has to. I mean, what else are you going to do? There's only so low you can go. But I think there's a reason that it happens is all.
All right. Fair enough. I want to make sure we get to, the rest of these super chats. We got a bunch of great questions for you. Jen says, hola, amigos and amigas. And to be totally inclusive, amigues. Thank you, Jen. We appreciate that. Murphy's Pool says, I'm King Returd. Thank you, Murphy's Pool. We appreciate that. Duratu says, hey, Noah, if you can't answer this question, I completely understand. I've been wondering whatever happened to your interview with Oliver Anthony. We were looking forward to you guys interviewing Oliver Anthony. What happened?
It was like a really elaborate scam, basically, that involved multiple email addresses and like actual businesses that we had to call. It was wild.
All right. Well, we'll just leave it at that. Let's see. We've got Elena. Elena says, "Hey Noah, are you aware that are you all aware that movements can get co-opted? Have you thought about this, and what actions have you taken?" So I mentioned at the top that we're starting to dig into a lot of this queer anarchist literature that I think is the most influential stuff over today's queer activists, the ones doing all the crazy stuff. And I explicitly read one on one of my podcasts the other day where they talk about this idea of social insertion and co-opting movements. And it's my position, at least with the Revolutionary Communists of America, I think the queer Marxists are already trying to co-opt them, and I think they probably will co-opt them at some point. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and what's funny is Trotskyists are notorious for doing that, and they have a term for it. They call it entryism. But the thing with Marxism, Leninism is it's hard to co-opt based on the sort of worldview of Marxism. And the only way for it to be sort of shunted aside is for education in that worldview to fall by the wayside. This is what happened in the Communist Party USA. By the 90s, the early 90s, when the Soviet Union was about to fall, or no, even before that, with Gorbachev, right? Their chairman was Gus Hall, hero of mine, right? The FBI actually illegally once entered Mexico to kidnap him and bring him back to the U.S. to arrest him, even though he hadn't committed a crime. Anyway, education had fallen so low, and I mean, we're in the last part of what we call the period of the middle classes. So recruitment had dwindled and that kind of stuff. That by the time Gus Hall realized what was happening with Gorbachev setting up for Yeltsin and moved to support a potential coup in the Soviet Union to sort of return to Marxism-Leninism, it was too late, and he had to sort of clamp down on all the democracy within the party because he was surrounded by a bunch of liberals, right, that weren't educated properly in Marxism. What they thought theory wasn't a worldview, wasn't this sort of form of logic we have that we call dialectical. It was instead, vague ideas on tactics that didn't apply to their conditions. And so the party split, and it hasn't been the same since. This is what's happened in general on the entire left. I mean, look at it, it's like a bickering, petty, childish mess because there's no real Marxism until a few years ago when it starts coming back. And we're sort of very proud to be a small part of that bigger movement and this return to Marxism, which is sort of advancing into American Marxism at this sort of higher stage in history.
I think it's fascinating when you guys always think that you're bickering and infighting because, like, you guys don't pay attention to the nonsense that goes on the right. Can I tell you about the time that the entire I'll tell you about the time just a couple months ago the entire conservative right had a 2-week meltdown over a beer calendar. I'm not joking. This was a real thing. There was an entire 2-week goddamn meltdown. That and like I don't know if you caught wind of this, but like I did a Twitter space with Jeremy Boring with the who's the CEO of the Daily Wire, and Nick Fuentes was on the Twitter space too. And I got Jeremy Boring to admit that he would never hire anyone that was critical of Israel, like on this Twitter space. And so that was a whole other thing that happened. Like it's just like, so I just think it's funny when I hear, I have this, like, my favorite abolish the family socialist is Sophie Lewis. I think you might have commented on the clips I posted of Sophie on Twitter the other day where she's saying like, fuck parental rights. And she's talking about queer being an insurgency against private property and all that. Well, I was once having a DM conversation with Sophie on Instagram, and I said to her, I was like, Sophie, you guys know you're winning, right? And she started like yelling at me over Instagram because she didn't want to hear that her, she was like, we are infighting all the time, and and I was just like, it's so funny because from our perspective, and I know that like you're not representative of the entire left. From our perspective, and most of my audience are kind of like, we hate both sides. The left is like kicking ass. Like, this is why, like, I'm not afraid to even talk to you guys anymore, because I'm like, we're gonna lose. We're obviously gonna lose. Like, it might take another decade or two, but we're absolutely going to lose because we look at you guys and you have it so much more together than anyone else that we interact with.
Well, I wouldn't say that the left does, but that's hilarious about the calendar. By the way, and it's I don't know. See. The left always complains, but they have the ruling class. I mean, the ruling class is woke now.
Yeah.
And they sort of act like they're somehow still subversive for this. Right? I'm like, you sound like Kamala Harris. What are you talking about? Right? How are you against the establishment? No, you are the establishment. Right? And so we see ourselves as separate from that completely. I do think you're right though that we are going to win. You should probably just join us. It'll be a lot easier.
I like my stuff. I like my stuff. My only hope is that if I have like some sort of like collegial relations with you guys, I get to be like part of the elite class that's still doing commentary on the internet, and everyone else goes to the gulag and I don't go to the gulag, because at least I've been nice to you and I've been fair to you along the way, and I said you were going to win. So I kind of like have that hope that you're not just going to show up in my house with a gun. But I guess I guess we'll see there. Milo says Bernie is greater than Vinny. I don't know what exactly that means. Do you know what that means?
Oh, yes, Bernie Kosar, better than Vinny Testaverde.
Oh.
Yes, he is, sir. I'm the last actual Bernie bro, by the way.
Well, let me ask you about a different Bernie, because one of the things we know from listening to communists is you guys don't seem to like Bernie Sanders and AOC, where the right thinks that Bernie Sanders and AOC are like your favorite people. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Some people do. It's wild. I was actually telling another guy, a colleague at the Institute, his name's Kyle, this on the phone earlier. I was telling him a story about one of the what we call old heads, right? The older people in the party. And he was a nice guy, old kind of curmudgeonly union guy, right? But was super up the ass of the Democrats, just incredibly up their ass. And I said AOC was a Nazi and her establishment connections were troubling. And he started yelling at me, going, "That's a leader of our movement." And I'm like, I don't think we're in the same movement, man. What are you talking about? Like this, we're not big fans of either. Carlos and Eddie both sort of began their sort of a journey towards political awareness with Bernie, right? He was the first guy they heard that wasn't just the plastic canned Politico. The way I see it, that's sort of how him and Trump act. They can be someone's sort of, like springboard, their trampoline into something else.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I grew up in Vermont, so I've been deeply familiar with Bernie Sanders my entire life. So but he is who he is. And I will give this to Bernie, and I always have. He is consistent. He has said exactly the same thing his entire flipping life. And then he sold, a book and made millions of dollars. And all of a sudden it wasn't about the millionaires anymore. It was about the billionaires. And, so he adjusted, but whatever. Let me get into, actually, I want to say this about Carlos too. So the stream that actually made me aware of you guys was a stream that Carlos was doing about his book, which apparently was about how you guys need to recruit more people from the MAGA movement. And there was a moment where I was like, you know what, he's actually right about that. And I actually had this whole kind of stint at the very beginning of 2021 where I was like, this is stupid. Like the BLM protesters and the MAGA people are actually all populists. They should all just work together. Like the minute that they all figure out who the real enemy is, like if they actually figured out that they could work together, that would actually be a game changer. And I started kind of like pushing this idea out there, and I did this like American thought leaders thing with like the Epic Times and all this stuff about this, and it was just like the reaction on the conservative right is no, they're all Marxists, and I was like, okay, but like they're also populists, and so maybe you try to find some alignment for once, and it just never took. And so when I watched that stream with Carlos and you guys talking about his book, I actually emailed you guys. I mean, I think I emailed Carlos and I said, you want to sell to MAGA people, and this was a little bit of a different time. My audience has shifted since then, but I was like, I have MAGA people on my channel. Do you want to come and talk to me? And I never heard back. So,
oh man, we must have missed that. You would not believe how many emails we get. It's a lot. I'm gonna have to go through and search your name and try to find it. I
was being a little bit of a troll too, so I can kind of understand if you were a guy like she may be more trouble than she's worth.
he may have ignored it based on that. Yeah. It's interesting. What's interesting to me though, regarding the book, it's actually not really about talking to MAGA people per se, but that the last period's left has what we call this purity fetish. So they refuse to talk to MAGA people or anyone else who isn't them because they're not pure enough, right? They're tainted by the real world. And so it was more of a call for what you're saying. Like, it doesn't matter where you come from. If your interests are in fighting against the establishment, why wouldn't you do it together? Real political action doesn't really happen at the level of the idea so much as at the level of necessity.
Fair enough. All right, we got a bunch more super chats, and I want to make sure we get to all of them. And thank you guys for your wonderful questions that you've been asking today. So Noah is about creating a new Marxism in the sense of American Marxism, not the traditional Marxism, the one that one typically thinks of from the Communist Manifesto. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, no, it's less that it's not that, and more that it is because it isn't. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but remember what I was saying about the universal in particular, right? Every country in which a communist movement arises has its own form of communism, its own theoretical guides that it has. So in China, you have, Mao Zedong thought and Deng Xiaoping theory and on and on. There's, they have 1,000 of them over there. Now there's Xi Jinping thought for a new century or whatever. In the Soviet Union, they had first calling it Marxism-Leninism, and then there's multiple schools coming off of that. We are particularly fond of one called Creative Marxism, which is sort of founded by a thinker named Evald Ilyenkov. Here in the U.S., it's still, Marx, Engels, Lenin. It's still Marxism-Leninism, but our American form has to understand the particularity of America, right? Our history, what our main struggles have been, and what our sort of people are, like the genuine essence of our people, how we are as a people. And in this, we sort of, we view it through what we call the American trajectory, right? So in the beginning, it's a British colony, and there's immigrants from all over. They're all separate peoples, but over time we become American, right? We sort of get assimilated into something that wasn't there before. I don't know what the word for that is. I'm not very smart. But this for us means it's necessary to understand what Du Bois, who we call the father of American Marxism, calls the struggle against the color line, as not just some, woke idea, but instead an historically determined form of the class struggle, right? The end of the Civil War, when the slaves revolted en masse, amounts to a general strike against the Confederacy, right? This deprives the Confederacy of labor and begins what Du Bois calls the first dictatorship of the proletariat in history, in Reconstruction, led by the Freedmen's Bureaus, right? And other institutions of the Black working class. So it doesn't end there, right? It keeps going, and we notice it at this revolutionary moment. And at the next one, which is the Civil Rights Movement and Martin Luther King, if you've watched our streams, you probably noticed the King quote at the end of our intro, which, a very kind audience member made for us, but embarrasses me every time we watch it because it's so loud. And there's like a shot of me where I'm like a tiny little hobbit guy. But anyway, this sort of creates what the modern American people is. And I think this is one of the reasons we go so hard against wokeism, is because wokeism sort of tries to put these formal, legalized dividing lines that hundreds of years of struggle and becoming who we are overcame, and we're now on a different side of. Not to say that there's no racism, that would be silly, but it tries to like formalize them again and put them back in, but with a woke veneer, right? Saying like, oh, I'm the rich white guy. I'm no longer the good one. I'm the bad one. All the effects are still going to be the same, but,
Fascinating. Fascinating. Let's see. Noah, do you recognize the fact that queer indoctrination in schools is a direct pipeline leading kids to socialism? What do you think about that?
No, I don't recognize that.
Well, because you think the queer Marxists are anti-communists.
Oh, 100%. They're absolutely anti-communist. Yes.
Okay. Do you recognize that queer indoctrination in schools is a direct line leading kids away from communism?
I wonder, you could maybe say socialism if we want to just, give them that. Sometimes I'm not nice enough to them. I
don't
guess
think we should be nice to them at all. They're horrible people.
A lot of them are the most hateful, sleazy people I've ever met. You should see the crazy things they've done to me. But I think that sort of thing in schools is a big problem. Yeah. And I think the left acting like it's not is an even bigger problem. Too many people just are okay with this stuff being taught to children. Look, if you're an adult, do whatever you want. Like, that's freedom. To each their own. But to force it on children is entirely screwed up. And if we want to call what they think their utopia land is socialism, fine.
So you are against the idea that parental rights are a form of private property that should be abolished?
Absolutely, yes.
Excellent. Okay, we're that's like the biggest hurdle that it seems to be in between us and the socialists these days. Human Centipede wants to know, are you a reformist?
No.
No. Okay. Milo wants to know, does Noah believe that anarcho-communists and the followers of people like, I'm not going to pronounce those, believe in a silly fantasy and there should be a government and collective to make socialism work right?
For me, it's less that there should be a government or collective and more that there is one. And we need to sort of soberly address the real world, right? Throughout history, since the advent of sort of modern agriculture, like the agricultural revolution, when people started, stop just picking berries everywhere off the ground and hunting and started cultivating animals and food, right? This starts formalizing what we call the state, right? And since then, it's existed in different forms according to different necessities and different classes that arise throughout history, right? Mm-hmm. I think that just saying we shouldn't have a state doesn't do anything. I think we need to understand how it arose, what characteristics it has, what it can do and can't do, in order to understand how it eventually, like everything in the entire universe, would sort of decay and fade away and go out of existence. I think just demanding that it not exist is utopian.
All right. Fair enough. Dragontail, thank you for the super chat. Dragontail says, I've lived in China for 11 years. I assure you that no one owns, they lease from the government. No one is allowed to speak against the CCP. How do you reconcile this in Mao? Free speech gone in Hong Kong and security law in place. Thoughts? Loved your article, by the way. Hi to Eddie. Dragontail has a crush on Eddie.
Yeah, everybody does. He's a lot better looking than me. That's fine. Yeah, so there is an over 90% home ownership rate in China. The state, as representing the people, however, owns all of the land. So there's a difference there, right? And they've had some crises with real estate investment scams lately. And so this is something that the Communist Party there is trying to address, right? Nothing's perfect. But I see that it is constantly improving. And I see a huge increase in the standard of living. And I think that it's less that people are all prevented from speaking against the government. I mean, I see negative articles all the time, but that they have a state media and their own form of censorship that the Chinese people are okay with. It works for the Chinese people. A lot of people view it, and I have friends who live there, right? A lot of people view it as protecting people from protecting the truth, right? When you know exactly how something is going to be spun, every time, you know there's a spin, right? If you're reading Chinese state media, you got to be stupid to think it's not going to be positive about the state. In the US, however, we're told our media is free when it's anything but. And most people hate the media and consider it completely worthless, at least in the abstract.
Well, yeah, but in China, my YouTube channel and my Substack wouldn't be able to exist, right? I mean, at least like, you know, isn't it better to have like, you know, a media that is allowed to question the establishment? Still, I mean, I think we can all acknowledge the media is shilling a lot of blatant propaganda, and I think people have gotten wise to that. But the fact that we are allowed to have media that allows us to question the establishment to some extent is the reason that people understand that.
I think that American media has been able to do that to a certain extent when it can be ignored as insignificant or not dangerous. The minute it is, they shut it down. Look at TikTok. They're already trying to get rid of it because it's so against the genocide in Palestine. Mm-hmm. And so, one, we're Americans, right? And we have a different notion of how these things should work. And it should be up to us to figure out our own forms. I mean, you have to have some censorship. You can't have, you know, people making insane pornography videos and posting them where kids can go and stuff like that, right? But we're absolutely capable of figuring out our own form that works for us. What I mean is the Chinese people have a form that works for them. And I know you can get on YouTube and all that in China. It's not like a huge deal. VPNs are very common. A lot of what they do is protect themselves from our intelligence agencies as they have to, right? I mean, everyone knows what Google is made up of ever since Snowden, right? So YouTube being owned by Google, I can very easily see why, you know, the government of China isn't a big fan, you know?
Okay, fair enough. We got a couple more questions. I want to make sure we get to those. Angel Eyes says, will the communists resist any future lockdowns and mandates that leader imposed on it? Yes. Just full stop.
Absolutely. Well, blanket yes.
Yo. Excellent answer. We like that. I still think you're an anarcho-capitalist. Murphy's Pool says you're 40, you're not Gen X.
I'm older than 40. I'm in my 40s.
All right. We won't make you reveal your... I, of course, am 29. I'm nowhere near 43, which is my actual age. Anyway, Honest Dog Allison wants to know, thank you for being here, Noah. Your take on Richard Wolff and worker co-op businesses.
I mean, if that's what people want to do, cool. But it's not socialism. It's, you know... I think what Richard Wolff does is sort of gets people thinking in a new mode. I don't think he's as utopian as a lot of his videos let on. But that's just, you know, my, you know, tinfoil hat theory. I don't know.
All right. Well, I think we've had a great chat. We are coming up on our time, but I just want to open the floor to you. Is there anything you want to ask me or anything else you want to say before we kind of wrap up the conversation?
Yeah, I have one question actually. So you keep saying you think I'm an ANCAP. I promise I'm a Marxist-Leninist. But are you like a doctrinaire in anarcho-capitalism, right? Not any classical liberalism, nothing like.
No, I'm an anarcho-capitalist.
You're Mises, not Hayek, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even tend to think of it like that. I mean, just to like break it down, real like how I learned. I live in New Hampshire, which is like the libertarian homeland. I learned from like some of the most hardcore libertarian activists in the world, and just how I think of it. I never read the 18 economics books I was given to read when I joined the Libertarian Party. I believe in abolishing all government because it makes things worse, not better. But I want to retain private property, and those are the kind of like basis of my thought process.
Okay. I think that's way too much to unpack now, but at the end of the show. But okay. Yeah, I was just curious, that's all.
Yeah, I'm never one that has gotten really into like the philosophy of things. So I've read Mises, I've read it, but I didn't like really pay attention to it, and I didn't really like ingrain it into my head like a lot of people do, because I just focus on much more practical application. How is this going to impact me in my real life? And I let the philosophy wonks debate about all of that stuff. I just don't involve myself in it. But I would love to have you back for another chat sometime. I think this has been actually really good, really productive. I think some of your answers from my audience have been surprising. And, you know, I really appreciate you, you coming on, and maybe we could even do, I mean, like I was thinking when we were talking, I was like, wouldn't it be fun to do maybe a collaboration around the debates coming up where we just like watch the Biden Trump debates and make fun of them from both sides?
Yes.
I thought that would actually be a kind of a fun little experiment. So maybe we can organize that.
Absolutely. I love it.
All right. Well, Noah, thank you for coming on. Again, guys, Noah is from Midwestern Marx. So if you want to head over to their website, is midwesternmarx.com. They also have a YouTube channel. Is there anything else you'd like to plug?
Yeah, May 24th. Join us, Jackson and Haas from Infrared, at the Free America to Free Palestine event.
All right. Tell Haas I said there's no such thing as a MAGA communist, and he's full of it for pushing that idea.
I will do so.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today, Noah. We'll have you back again soon. All right.
Thanks.